The grand hall of the Frostspire Palace gleamed with silver light, reflecting off the ice-carved walls and the polished floor. Snow whispered against the tall windows, carried by the ever-present winter wind that circled the mountain. Inside, the warmth of flickering torches contrasted the cold. But the hall remained still, tense, as if holding its breath. At the far end of the hall sat the Alpha King. Eirender, on his throne of carved obsidian and silver. He wore the ceremonial crown with its sharp edges that caught the torchlight like frozen fire. His cloak of deep blue velvet, trimmed with white fur, swept behind him. For years, his people had revered him not just for his strength, but for the unbroken calm in his gaze, the quiet power that commanded armies and loyalty alike. None dared challenge him. None, that is, until tonight. The hall was filled with nobles and emissaries, all dressed in layers of rich cloth and jewelry that shimmered in the cold light. The air was tense with anticipation, for tonight was the ceremony of the new alliance. This ceremony was meant to strengthen the king's rule and show the world the unity of his kingdom. No one had expected anything unusual. Until the doors opened, a hush fell over the crowd. Eirender's eyes, sharp and cold, turned to the entrance. There, in the wide doorway, stood a figure draped in shadows. She moved with quiet certainty, carrying a small bundle wrapped in dark cloth. The courtiers whispered, their voices trembling like wind against thin glass. It was the silent Omega. For years, she had vanished from the kingdom, leaving rumors in her wake. Some claimed she had been taken by enemies. Others whispered of a curse that had claimed her life. Few had seen her in years, and now she walked alone into the throne hall, carrying something in her arms that drew Eirender's gaze like a magnet. The Alpha King froze. His hand, which had rested on the throne's arm, tightened around the edge. The crown above him seemed heavier in that frozen moment, as if it weighed not just gold and silver, but the burdens of truth and betrayal. The Omega stepped forward, silent but determined. She placed the bundle carefully on the steps before the throne, bowing slightly, her dark hair falling over her face. The hall was completely still. Even the torches seemed to burn quieter, their flames shrinking under the weight of the moment. The crowd parted slightly, curiosity mixed with fear. And then the bundle stirred. A child's small, uncertain eyes opened, reflecting the light like twin pieces of amber caught in frost. The child looked at the king, and in that instant Eirender saw what no one had expected. It was his heir. His hidden child, a secret he had buried beneath years of duty and shadow, was alive. The memory of past mistakes struck him suddenly. He had sent the Omega away years ago to protect her from the treacheries of the court. He had thought it best to hide the child, to guard the kingdom from scandal and danger. Yet here she was, the child he had never seen, yet whose existence had shaped every lonely decision he had made since. Eirender's chest tightened. He could feel his pulse in his temples and his hands in the frozen crown above him. The courtiers held their breath. The room seemed to stretch, time slowing. As the king's eyes locked on the Omega, "Your Grace," one voice dared, trembling. "Who is?" Eirender raised a hand, cutting through the question like steel through silk. His voice, deep and commanding, filled the hall. Silence. He looked at the Omega. She met his gaze without fear. There was no bowing, no pleading, a quiet strength that he remembered from long ago. The child in her arms stirred again, and she held him protectively. The king's mind raced. So many questions flooded him at once. Why now? How did she survive? Who else knew of the child's existence? And most painfully, why had she returned alone, carrying the secret that had haunted him for years? He stood slowly, the movement deliberate and heavy. His cloak swept the floor as he descended from the throne. Each step echoed through the hall, sharp and commanding. The Omega did not move. The child looked between them, sensing the tension, but unaware of the full weight of the moment. Eirender stopped a few paces from her, eyes narrowing. "You should not have come here," he said quietly. Yet every word carried the force of a storm held in check. "I had no choice," she replied softly, her voice steady. They were coming. The child needed to see you. They needed your protection. The courtiers murmured again, but Arender ignored them. All that existed in that moment was the Omega, the child, and the invisible threads of past decisions stretching between them. He could see the truth in her eyes, the determination, the courage, and a trust in him that he had not earned, but which now weighed on him more than any crown could. He stepped closer, and for the first time in many years, he saw her as she had been before exile, before betrayal, before the silence that had haunted his nights. She had grown stronger, sharper, and yet there was still a gentleness beneath the armor she carried like a second skin. And that gentleness was now extended to the small life in her arms, their child. His child, the living proof of their bond and their mistakes. "Why now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But the weight behind it made even the tallest lord in the hall shrink back. "Because he needs you," the Omega said simply. "And you need him." The child cooed softly, reaching out with tiny hands toward the king. Something in Arender's chest took a mixture of love, regret, and hope. The world outside the palace melted away, leaving only the three of them in a frozen eternity. The king's mind returned to the ceremony, the alliance, the expectations, and the loyalty of his court. But none of it mattered now. He realized that the throne, the kingdom, the crown, all of it was meaningless without the child. Without them, for the first time, he allowed himself to feel vulnerability, a dangerous emotion he had long thought would undo him. He took a careful step closer. The courtiers watched in silence, sensing the moment, but not daring to intervene. The winter wind howled against the walls, echoing the turmoil within the king's heart. Finally, Arender knelt before the Omega and the child. It was a gesture that shocked everyone in the hall. The Alpha King, feared by nations and untouchable in his authority, knelt. His cold eyes softened as he looked at the child, and the Omega met his gaze with a quiet understanding. "Your Grace," one noble whispered. The ceremony Arender raised a hand, silencing the voice again. "There will be no ceremony tonight," he said. "Not until this is resolved. Not until my heir is safe. Not until the truth is known." The hall seemed to exhale, but the tension remained. Whispers spread, murmurs of scandal and shock, yet no one moved forward. They waited, as if knowing that some moments could not be rushed, that some truths required their own reckoning. The Omega stepped closer, placing the child gently into Arender's arms. The king held the small form, feeling the warmth and life that had been absent from his life for too long. He realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that this child carried not just the blood of the kingdom, but the hope of a future he had long denied himself. Arender looked at the Omega, his expression a mixture of anger, longing, and something he could not name. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, to rage against the years of separation, but he found himself silent. In that silence, they both understood the enormity of what had returned to them, and then, from the far doors of the hall, faint sound echoed a soft, almost imperceptible crack. Snow shifted. Something moved outside, unseen. The Alpha King's eyes flicked toward it, instinct taking over. He tightened his grip on the child, standing protectively. The Omega's hand brushed against his arm, a quiet reassurance. She did not need to speak. He understood. Danger had not vanished. It had only been delayed. And whatever had driven her back to the palace was not finished with them yet. Arender looked down at the child in his arms, then at the Omega. The weight of the crown above him seemed lighter now, yet heavier in another way, the weight of responsibility, of love, and of choices he could no longer avoid. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King's heart raced not with fear of war or betrayal, but with the vulnerability of a man seeing his life, his past, and his future in the eyes of those he loved. The hall remained frozen, silent as snow swirled outside, and in that silence one thought burned in Arender's mind. The ceremony had been paused. The alliance could wait, but the child, the Omega, and the truth they carried could not. And for the first time, The Alpha King realized that everything he had built, every throne, every battle, every decision, had led to this frozen moment of reckoning. The next steps would determine not just his reign, but the fate of his heart and the life of the heir he had never known. And beyond the great doors of Frostspire Palace, shadows stirred. Something had noticed the child. Something was coming. The Alpha King tightened his grip. He would not let the past claim what belonged to the future. And the Omega, silent but resolute, met his eyes. Together, they would face whatever came next. The throne hall remained silent long after the Alpha King Heir had taken the child into his arms. Courtiers whispered behind gloved hands, unsure whether to flee, speak, or simply stare in awe. The winter wind pressed against the palace walls, carrying with it the chill of the mountains and a faint sense of danger. Arender's gaze did not leave the silent Omega. The child, small and warm in his arms, wriggled slightly, reaching toward him as if recognizing something he could not yet name. Arender's heart tightened. This little life, their life, was more fragile than any alliance, more precious than any crown. The Omega stepped forward, her eyes steady but unreadable. "He is yours," she said simply, her voice soft yet unwavering. "I kept him hidden to protect him. But now, you must see him. You must take responsibility." Arender's voice, usually sharp and commanding, softened. "All these years? Why did you not tell me?" "I could not," she replied. "There were forces in the kingdom who would have taken him from me, from both of us. And I could not trust anyone, perhaps, not even you." He studied her face, the faint lines shaped by years of survival and silence. He remembered the girl she had once been, quiet and strong, fearless in ways no one understood. Now she was a woman shaped by exile, by fear, by courage. Carrying their child through years of shadow, Arender felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had sent her away, believing it was for the child's safety. He had thought his decision wise, yet the cost had been high years of silence, lost moments, and the heavy weight of separation. "I failed you," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I thought I was protecting you both, but I was blind." The Omega's eyes softened for a moment, though her stance remained firm. "You were protecting the kingdom? I understand that. But he needed more than protection. He needed you." The child stirred again, letting out a soft, uncertain cry. Arender bent closer, his voice gentle, almost unrecognizable from the commanding tones he used in court. "I will protect him. Always," he whispered, feeling the warmth of the small body against his chest. Outside the throne hall, shadow moved along the palace walls, unseen by most. One of the sentries shifted nervously, sensing a presence beyond the gates. Something had followed the Omega Heirs, something that had waited for this exact moment. Arender remained unaware of the approaching threat, focused entirely on the Omega and their child. He reached for her hand instinctively, a rare gesture that startled both of them. She did not pull away, but her fingers tightened around his for a brief moment. It was a silent acknowledgement, a promise that neither time nor distance could erase. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every detail of these years. I need to know." The Omega hesitated, then led him to a side chamber, away from prying eyes. The hall seemed to exhale behind them, as if releasing its breath after holding it for decades. They moved in silence, the child cradled carefully in her arms. And the weight of unspoken words hung between them. Once inside the chamber, she set the child down on a soft bed of furs. The little one's eyes followed Arender, curious and unafraid. The king knelt beside the bed, studying the tiny features, searching for a trace of himself or the Omega within this fragile life. "They called him lost," she began, her voice steady. "They tried to take him. I had to move through shadows, through mountains, through enemies no one knew existed. Every day I feared for his life. Every night I hoped he would live to see this day. And now he has." Arender's chest ached. The weight of her words was heavier than any battle he had fought, heavier than any crown or throne. He had always been a man of control, but control could not shield him from this. He could not command the past, only face it. "Why come now?" he asked. "Why risk everything to return?" Because they are coming again, she replied, her eyes darkening. The same forces that tried to destroy us once will not rest. They have waited. And now that you know, they will act. Erinder's expression hardened. The cold mask of the Alpha King returned for a moment, sharp and unyielding. Then we prepare. They will not take him. Not from me. Not from us. She studied him quietly, noting the change in his demeanor. He was still the Alpha King, the same man who had commanded armies and bent nations to his will, but now there was something different in his eyes. Something vulnerable, human, and yet more powerful than any sword or army. A man who would do anything to protect his child and the woman he had once loved. The Omega stepped closer. Lowering her voice, "There is more you need to understand. He's not just a child. He carries something unusual, something tied to the bloodline, something they fear." Erinder's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She knelt beside the bed, her eyes scanning the child's delicate features. "I do not know all the details. But I know this. They wanted to erase him, erase the line entirely. That is why I kept him hidden. That is why I had to leave you in silence. Whatever he is, they fear it." The king's mind raced. He had faced many enemies, yet the thought of unknown forces hunting his child filled him with a new, raw determination. He would not allow the past to repeat itself. He would protect this life, even if it meant facing dangers beyond imagination. A sudden noise interrupted them, a faint, deliberate tapping at the chamber door. The child stirred, sensing tension. The Omega stiffened, alert. "Stay here," Erinder commanded softly, though the gentleness in his voice betrayed concern. "No one will harm him while I am here." He moved to the door, opening it just enough to see a figure slipping in the shadows along the corridor. The sentries outside had not noticed, but Erinder's instincts were sharper than any sword. His hand rested on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger, ready for action. The figure froze at the doorway, sensing the Alpha King's presence. Then, without a sound, it disappeared into the darkness beyond. Erinder's gaze returned to the Omega. "They are here," he said simply, "and soon they will make their move. We must leave the palace. Tonight." She nodded, her expression steady. "I thought you would say that. I have a path through the mountains, away from prying eyes. But it will not be easy. And we cannot go alone." The king's mind raced. Every strategy, every plan, every loyal soldier he could summon not mattered if they were too late. The child's safety depended on swift action and careful decision-making. Yet he also knew something else. He could not leave the Omega behind. Not now. Not ever. "We go together," he said firmly. "All of us. No secrets. No hesitation." The child reached out, tiny fingers brushing against Erinder's cheek. He swallowed the emotions he had buried for years, breaking through in a single sharp wave. He had once ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and faced death without flinching, but nothing had prepared him for this. The weight of love. Responsibility and redemption carried in a small, fragile life. The Omega stepped forward, placing a protective hand on his arm. "We must move quickly," she said. "They will not wait for dawn." Erinder nodded, lifting the child carefully into his arms. The warmth of the small body against his chest reminded him of everything he had almost lost. Every step he took toward the side entrance of the palace, the corridors seemed darker, the shadows longer. The palace he had ruled with authority now felt fragile, threatened by dangers both seen and unseen as they approached the exit. A chilling wind swept through the hall, carrying the scent of frost and the faintest whisper of danger. The Alpha King paused at the doorway, looking back once more at the throne he had just abandoned. Everything he had fought for, the crown, the kingdom, the ceremonies, seemed distant now. All that mattered was the child in his arms and the Omega by his side. And then, from the darkness beyond the palace walls, a faint sound echoed. The crunch of snow under deliberate steps, too soft for anyone else to hear. They were not alone. Erinder's grip on the child tightened. The Omega's hand rested lightly on his arm, steadying him, grounding him. The Alpha King, frozen in the ceremony just hours ago, now felt a different kind of power. Not the power of a throne, not the fear of an army, but the fierce determination of a man who would fight for love, for redemption, and for the future of his bloodline. Together, they stepped into the night, leaving the grand hall behind. Snow swirled around them, the cold pressing against their faces. But it could not touch the warmth that bound them. Alpha, Omega, and Heir. The mountain winds whispered of the journey ahead. The shadows were closing in, and the Alpha King knew one truth with absolute certainty: whatever came next, he would not allow the past to claim his child. The night stretched before them, silent and dangerous, and the first steps of their journey into revelation and peril had begun. The night outside Frostspire Palace was merciless. Snow swirled around the mountain peaks, whipped by winds that cut through even the thickest cloaks. The Alpha King Arender moved swiftly but carefully, carrying his hidden heir in his arms. Beside him, the silent Omega guided their path, her eyes scanning the dark for danger at every step. The palace had seemed safe, secure behind its ice walls and loyal soldiers, but the shadows that had followed the Omega were patient, waiting for the perfect moment. And that moment had come. Arender's breath clouded in the frigid air, his eyes sharp, catching every movement. He had faced armies, treachery, and the bitterest winters of the northern kingdoms. But this night felt different. The stakes were more personal. This child, this fragile life in his arms, carried the weight of his redemption, and he would not let it fall into the hands of those who had once sought to destroy them. The Omega's steps were silent, almost effortless, as if she were part of the mountain itself. Her calm presence grounded him. For years, Arender had relied on fear and command. But now, in the cold of the night, he relied on trust. And the woman beside him had earned it 1,000 times over. "They are close," she said softly, her voice blending with the howl of the wind. "I can feel them. They move like hunters. Silent, careful, they know the child is here." Arender nodded, adjusting the cloak around the little one to shield him from the wind. "Then we will not give them the chance," he replied, his voice low but full of authority. "We move quickly. Every step counts." The mountain path was narrow, treacherous, and covered with fresh snow. Each step could betray them, sending them tumbling down into the icy chasms below. Arender led, his eyes scanning the dark ahead, his body moving with the strength of a man accustomed to danger. The Omega followed, keeping the child protected in her gaze. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the mountains. Snow shifted unnaturally from above, and Arender's instincts kicked in. He pressed the child close to his chest and pushed the Omega behind him. A sheet of ice broke free from the overhang, crashing down where they had just walked moments before. "We must move faster," he said, urgency lacing his words. "They will use the terrain against us." The Omega nodded. "There is a pass ahead, narrow and hidden. It will give us some protection. But it is risky," he continued, moving with careful speed. Arender's arms ached from holding the child, but he would not stop. The little one's soft breathing and tiny heartbeat reminded him of everything he had missed, everything he had lost, and everything he could never let go. As they rounded a bend in the mountain, shadows shifted among the trees. Figures emerged, cloaked in dark furs, faces hidden. Mercenaries and hunters, sent by those who had sought to erase the Alpha King's line. They had been patient, waiting for the right moment. And now they were here. Arender's hand rested on the hilt of his ceremonial dagger, the weight of it grounding him. "Stay behind me," he commanded softly, his eyes never leaving the approaching threat. The Omega stepped close, her hand on his arm. "We fight together," she said, "and we survive together." The mercenaries hesitated, seeing the Alpha King holding a child, and a moment of surprise passed over them. They had expected to catch him alone, expecting fear or hesitation. But what they saw instead was strength tempered by love. A man willing to face anything to protect what mattered most. Arender moved forward, each step deliberate. "Leave," he called, his voice carrying across the snow. "You will not touch him." The mercenaries laughed, a low, cruel sound. They spread across the path, blocking their way. Arender's gaze hardened. He could feel the power within himself, a fierce determination that no enemy could break. He would not retreat. He would not fail. The Omega stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "Remember," she whispered, "he is more than a child. The bloodline carries power. You must protect him and trust the rest to me." Arender nodded, understanding. He did not fully know the child's abilities, but he felt something extraordinary in his small heartbeat, something that the enemies feared even from afar. He trusted the Omega's instincts. She had kept the child safe for years, moving through shadows and surviving threats that would have killed any ordinary person. The first attack came swiftly. A hunter lunged from the trees, aiming for the king. Arender reacted instantly, stepping aside and using the dagger to deflect the strike. The child stirred, but the Omega's quick hand shielded him from harm. Another mercenary fell to the snow as Arender moved with strength and precision, each motion calculated to protect the child while fending off attackers. The battle was brief, but intense. The mountain amplified every sound, the clash of steel, the rush of wind, the cry of the child. But even as they fought, Arender's mind remained sharp. He could feel the Omega beside him, guiding, warning, protecting. Together, they were a force greater than the sum of their parts. When the last attacker fell into the snow, the king's chest heaved. The child in his arms looked up at him, eyes wide and trusting. Arender's heart swelled with a fierce love he had never known he could feel. "You are safe," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. "I will not let anything harm you." The Omega studied the scene, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "We cannot stop here. They will regroup. The pass is near. Move." They pressed on, climbing higher into the mountains, the snow growing deeper, the wind colder. Every step was a test of endurance, every breath a battle against the frost. Yet with each passing moment, Arender felt a strange clarity. The child's presence, the Omega's steady guidance, the necessity to survive all of it gave him a strength he had never known. As they reached the hidden pass, a narrow trail carved between cliffs and snow, the king paused. Below them, the path stretched like a frozen river, sharp and perilous. Above, the shadows seemed to watch, waiting. "This is it," the Omega said quietly. "Once we are through, the danger lessens. But you must be careful. The mountains are not kind to those who falter." Arender looked down at the child, then at the Omega. "I will not falter," he said. "I will protect him, and I will not let the past destroy us again." The wind howled through the pass, carrying with it an eerie warning. Snow swirled around them, masking their path and hiding their movements. The mercenaries could not follow them easily here, but the mountains themselves were dangerous. One misstep could send them plummeting into death. Step by step, they moved forward. Arender's eyes were sharp, every muscle taut, every decision measured. The Omega stayed close, her presence a quiet reassurance. The child slept peacefully, unaware of the peril, trusting the two who carried him through life and shadow. Hours passed. The mountain trail twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing to barely a foot of space between the cliffs. Arender carried the child without complaint, the weight a constant reminder of what he fought for. The cold bit through their clothes, but the warmth of the small life in his arms and the Omega's steady guidance kept him moving at last. They reached a small cave carved into the side of the mountain. Snow blocked most of the entrance, but the Omega pushed it aside, revealing a hidden refuge. The air inside was still warmer than the outside, with faint traces of smoke from a previous fire. It was not perfect, but it was safe for the night. Arender laid the child down gently, brushing the snow from his small body. The Omega knelt beside the little one, her hands protective and tender. Arender studied them both, feeling a deep surge of emotion he had not allowed himself in years. Love, responsibility, hope all entwined in this fragile, quiet moment. "We survived," he said softly, though the words felt almost too small for the storm of emotion inside him. "But the night is not over. They will come again." The Omega nodded, her eyes meeting his. "And when they do, we will face them together." You, me, and him. Nothing else matters. Arender nodded, feeling the weight of the truth in her words. The Alpha King, once defined by power and fear, now understood another kind of strength, the strength to protect, to love, and to trust. The snowstorm raged outside, but inside the cave, a fragile warmth persisted. The King, the Omega, and their hidden three lives bound by fate, by love, and by the promise of redemptions, at together in silence, preparing for the trials yet to come. Yet even in the quiet, a faint sound echoed outside the cave entrance. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, moving closer through the snow. The night was far from over, and the Alpha King knew that the true test was only beginning. The hidden cave offered only fragile protection. Outside, the wind tore through the mountain passes, carrying snow like a relentless tide. Arender, the Alpha King, sat near the entrance, the child cradled gently in his arms. The Omega knelt beside him, her eyes scanning the shadows that shifted just beyond the firelight. For a moment, there was quiet and uneasy peace. The child slept, unaware of the dangers that had hunted him and would hunt him again. Arender felt the weight of responsibility heavier than any crown. He had survived wars, treachery, and bitter winters. But nothing had tested him like protecting this tiny life. They will not stop, the Omega said softly, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had faced death more times than she could count. They will come for him. For us. For what we represent. Arender's jaw tightened. Then we fight. No hesitation. No mercy. His words were not born of anger, but of the raw, unwavering determination of a father and a king who had seen too much loss. The wind outside shifted, carrying a faint sound footsteps on snow. They were cautious, deliberate. Not the careless approach of ordinary hunters, but calculated and patient. Someone had tracked them. Someone had known exactly where to find them. Arender rose slowly, holding the child close to his chest. The Omega mirrored his movements. "Stay behind me," he said, though there was no need to order her. They were a unit, unspoken, bound by trust and necessity. The shadows outside the cave deepened. Figures emerged from the storm, cloaked and moving like wolves. But even as they approached, a strange reaction occurred. The child stirred, a low, soft hum leaving his lips. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But then the snow around the cave entrance seemed to shift in response. A faint glow emanated from the child, golden and warm against the cold white snow. The Alpha King froze for a moment. He had felt something unusual in the child before, a spark of life that seemed extraordinary, but he had not expected this. The glow pulsed with the child's heartbeat, a protective shield that extended outward. Keeping the attackers at bay, the Omega's eyes widened in recognition. "He is the key," she whispered. "The bloodline. It carries power." They feared it for a reason. The hunters stopped, sensing something beyond their understanding. They glanced at each other nervously, their movements slowing. They were skilled, ruthless. But they were not prepared for the child's presence, the living, symbol of the Alpha King's legacy and the Omega's courage. Arender's voice was calm but unyielding. "Turn back. Leave now. You will not harm him." A tense silence followed. Then, one of the cloaked figures stepped forward, holding a blade that glinted faintly in the snow. "We will not leave until he is ours," the voice said, cold and determined. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. "Then you will fail." He stepped forward, the child held high, his aura mixing with the glow. The Omega moved beside him, her presence a silent strength, her hands ready to defend. The first attack came, a snow-laden branch hurled from the shadows. Arender deflected it effortlessly, the child secure in his arms. The attackers lunged again, but each move seemed slowed, almost repelled by the child's glowing presence. Arender realized then that this child was more than a symbol. He carried the power of the bloodline, force neither the Alpha King nor his enemies fully understood. The Omega whispered urgently. "The ritual of the linet's awakening. He is responding to you, Arender. His protection, his strength. It will grow if you focus with him." Arender took a deep breath, closing his eyes briefly. He let himself feel everything: the child's warmth, the Omega's steadying presence, the mountain's cold embrace. He focused on the bond they shared, the love that had endured through years of separation and silence. When he opened his eyes, the glow from the child intensified. The hunters staggered, unease flashing across their faces. The Alpha King took another step forward, his voice echoing like thunder. "Leave this place. Your hunt ends here." The wind shifted violently, snow whipping into the air. The hunters faltered, some retreating instinctively. The cave seemed to pulse with energy, as if the mountain itself acknowledged the Alpha King's resolve and the child's power. The Omega stepped closer to the child, speaking softly. "You are safe. We are here, together." The child stirred, reaching out, and the glow spread wider, pushing the remaining attackers back into the storm. One by one, the hunters disappeared into the blizzard, defeated not by weapons, but by the strength of a family united: Alpha, Omega, and Heir. The storm calmed slightly, leaving an eerie, golden light around the cave entrance. Arender sank to his knees, holding the child close, feeling the rhythm of life pulsing through him. "You are safe now," he whispered, tears mingling with the snow on his face. "I will never let anyone take you from me." The Omega placed her hand on his shoulder, her eyes softening. "You have faced everything, Arender, and you will face more. But not alone. You have a sand, he has you." For a long moment, the three of them remained in silence. The storm outside a reminder of the world's dangers, the cave a fragile refuge. But in that silence was hope, a quiet certainty that the past could be healed, and the future could be claimed together. Arender looked down at the child, then at the Omega. "All these years, I thought power was in the throne, the armies, the fear I commanded. But now I see, real power is here with you both. This bond, this love is stronger than any crown or sword." The Omega's eyes glistened. "And that is why they feared him," she said softly. "He is the hope that cannot be controlled, the life that cannot be taken." The child's small hand reached out to touch Arender's face. The Alpha King held him closer, feeling a warmth and light he had never known in his life of cold strategy and unbroken authority. In that touch was forgiveness, trust, and the promise of a new beginning. Arender spoke quietly, almost to himself. "The past cannot hurt us anymore. The mistakes, the betrayals, they end here. From now on, we face the future together." The Omega knelt beside him, placing her hand over his, "And we will face it as a family. Alpha, Omega, and Heir. Together." The wind outside calmed further, as if acknowledging the bond forged in trial and fire. Snow swirled gently, glittering in the golden light of the child's glow. The mountain, once harsh and merciless, seemed to bow to the strength of their unity. Arender rose, the child secure in his arms. "We leave this cave," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of the Alpha King, tempered by love and protection. "The kingdom, our home, awaits. And this time we will reclaim it not with fear, but with hope." Omega followed, her presence steady and resolute. "The people need to see what we have survived, and they will follow us once they understand the truth of what has returned." Together they emerged from the cave into the quiet dawn. The storm had passed, leaving a world sparkling with frost and sunlight. Arender looked out over the mountains, the kingdom stretching before him, filled with possibilities, danger, and hope. He held the child close, the Omega beside him. For the first time, he felt the weight of the crown differently, not as a burden of fear and command, but as a symbol of protection, responsibility, and love. The Alpha King had been frozen once, mid-ceremony, by the arrival of a truth he could not ignore. Now he was moving forward, unafraid, with the Omega and his hidden Heir at his side. Whatever trials awaited, they would face them together. Whatever shadows lingered, they would not falter. The child stirred, opening his eyes, and the king smiled, feeling the power of hope and love coursing through him. He knew that the future, uncertain though it might be, was theirs to shape. And as they descended the mountain toward the kingdom, The Alpha King finally understood the most profound truth, that redemption was not in crowns or fear, but in love, courage, and the lives one swore to protect. The world was vast, cold, and full of challenges, but together, they were unstoppable.